not a hero's death, but like a villain's death. Like,
Yeah, but
I don't,
I just mean in general, he doesn't deserve like a big monumental death scene like you were saying. I hope he just like passes away and nobody cares. This should not be an event for the annals.
yeah, like he falls into one of those mud bogs and, the quicksand
Yeah, and
that,
gets slurped up by that scorpion snake thing.
yeah, I mean, that would be perfect for
It would be
Kevin,
a perfect
frankly.
ending.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. Amber here with Laura. We are finally wrapping up Rings of Power episode 8, and I have to say that I think one of the best parts about this episode is we're getting all of this payoff for all of the characters. Pretty much everyone that we're spending time with in this series gets some kind of wrap up, and then it's posing a lot of big questions for what is going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I actually found it really refreshing that we had so much payoff for all the characters and the storylines, but everything is still leaving room for the next season.
Yeah. I think it's interesting with this show that going into it, I was kind of like, I'm going to watch it, see what happens. I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did, and I think a lot of that has to do with Sauron being incredible, the actor that plays him, Anatar, everything that happens in Eregion is incredible. I want to talk about Sauron because I think he's kind of like he's the anchor for this series and this season. And I want to talk about him and what the show is getting right with their villains, because we've got a lot of villains going on. We've got Pharazôn and Kemen. We've got Adar. We've got Anatar slash Sauron. We've got a lot happening.
The many faces of Anatar.
Yes. King Durin even is a bit of an antagonistic force here. We've got Acolyte Man.
My favorite.
We've got so many. I think you'll say that Sauron is probably the best villain. Do you have a second favorite?
Oh, I really like Adar. And
Yeah.
one thing that I think the show has done really right as far as the villains go is to give villains dimension, which I do think that some of the villains that we've seen in this universe prior to this show have been a little like one note or flat, just, evil for the sake of being evil. And this show has managed to give the villains of Middle Earth character dimension, like really breathing life into them.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because there's some villains that are like almost hard to dislike.
I think for me, Adar is too likable. Like, not in a bad way either.
Oh, he's
Like,
very
I feel for
likable.
the guy.
Yeah.
Especially when he puts the ring on this episode and we get to see hot Adar, and I'm like, okay, I'm here for
Yeah,
that.
Adar's a good example of a villain who's hard to dislike.
Yeah. In terms of most dislikable, it's really interesting because Sauron is just, evil, like just over the top, right? But then you have someone like Kemen. And Kemen is a special case because he falls into that spoiled brat, rich kid trope, kind of like a King Joffrey, where it's just like you see that face, you want to punch that face. Like, he is just awful.
You're right. I see that face. I want to commit felonious violence. I would say actually Kemen is my least favorite villain, even above his father and his father's eyebrows.
Pharazôn eyebrows are eyebrowing all the time.
Pharazôn's eyebrows are
the other villain.
They are their own character.
I love that. I think with Kemen, it kind of brings in this idea of you can do two types of villains, right? One, you want them to be hateable. You want them to be someone you really just hate. And Sauron is an entity, especially in the movies. I don't know so much about the books. He's not really a person. He's just this like dark, godly force. And that's not hateable. It's not relatable. A monster isn't hateable. If you watch Predator, you're not looking at Predator and being like, oh, that alien monster, sure do hate it. No, it's just a monster doing monstrous things. What you need to do if you want a really hateable character, you need someone like a Kemen. You need someone where You've been out and about in society. I'm sure every single person on earth has, at some point in their life, met a spoiled, rich, entitled person, been like, man, like, I just hate this guy. And that's what you get with like a Kemen. Doing that with Sauron is a lot harder until you bring him down on kind of a personal level and make him into the type of person that you've at some point kind of experienced. And with Sauron, it's more like a Sauron is giving gaslighting, manipulative, narcissist ex boyfriend vibes. Someone who has just ruined lives, you know?
Yeah.
Like he is just so over the top, hateable in that aspect. But then you also have this other side of him where he is the monster and he's doing these really almost magical, over the top illusions and stuff like that. He's capable of great power, but he's using it in a way that's very relatable and manipulations and just layers and layers of illusions. And I think mashing up those two types of villains that you see in literature and movies and TV to create Sauron, the monster, and then like the relatable villain is just perfect. I'm so happy with how they did this, and I was so surprised with how they did this that when I finished the series, I was just like, yep, probably best villain of the year, maybe one of the best characters of the year.
Ooh, okay. I could definitely agree with that, especially for Sauron. Sauron has like true evil overlord.
Yes.
That's how I feel about him. Like he's giving true evil overlord, whereas somebody like Kemen is giving why is
Entitled
giving
lackey.
entitled lackey and a perfect example of why you should not be born into leadership.
Right? Third generation. Numenor's done. I know it. I've seen it.
I've seen it in the Palantir.
I have it sitting next to me right now. It actually shows me like eating lasagna for dinner tonight, so I'm pretty excited about that.
How did you feel about how things went down for Adar in this final episode?
Oh, because I like Adar, it was kind of a gut punch.
Yeah.
Like, of course, he's one of the bad guys. You want the elves to win and come out on top, but Adar is almost too much of a good guy to be a bad guy. Like,
Yeah, he exists in this like space of unknown where
yeah,
he's neither hero nor villain. He's like a completely separate entity that's bringing like a whole new set of goals with it because he isn't really trying to be like the overlord of anything. He's just really trying to find like a homeland for himself and his children.
yeah, and I get it. There's nothing on that side of things, there's nothing inherently evil about it. But his obsession with Sauron, on one hand, it's kind of like, dude, let it go. But on the other hand, if Sauron exists, he's coming for Adar. The past happened, and Sauron's not going to forget what he did. So he is kind of in this space in between where he wants a homeland for him and his children, but he's also going to have to face up with Sauron at some point. It has to happen. And he gets caught in that and kind of uses his children as cannon fodder, which that's his biggest mess up.
His drive and obsession to defeat Sauron kind of turns his own plan on its head and leads it to working against him. And to like the saddest villain death ever, quite frankly.
Really? I mean,
I was like
getting
watching
shanked like that?
by your favorite child. Like he's laying there on the ground. He's getting stabbed by his children. And you know, he's just laying there dying. And he's going to go to his grave knowing that the deceiver truly won.
The deceiver deceived.
Yeah.
Got him.
Like Sauron really did make this like the most painful death possible for Adar.
He did.
And then the
He
crazy part
did.
about that is it was just like Sauron was like, whatever, this is light work.
Yeah, I appreciate that this whole wrap up between Adar v Sauron v elves kind of was one high note of the end of the series. I love that we got everyone facing off and that it all comes to a close in the end. Like we talked about having payoff, it's really nice. But when it opens up the door for what's going to happen next. Like the elves are going to have to regroup, rethink their tactics, and come up with a plan. And I kind of like how the end of this episode, it's a little bit like an Avengers moment where you've got the elves standing up on the cliff and, the crowds are chanting and cheering. And you've got this kind of like very whimsical, uplifting moment. And it's like, oh, okay. So now they have to come back with some real tactics, some real power, and try and figure out what's next.
Yeah, because it doesn't just end here.
No, it can't.
I mean, to me, it seems like this is battle one.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the first of
exactly.
many.
That's a good point because you're not going to get a clean wrap up on this storyline anytime soon.
No.
Sauron's too powerful.
Way too powerful for there to be a quick wrap up on this.
One of the things that I was curious about is after they heal Galadriel and we've got that kind of like intense moment on the cliffside, is this the origin for
Yep, Rivendell.
What? My brain kept saying Riverdale. Nope. I'm like, no, that's not it.
I
that's not
actually wanted to ask this like 2 minutes ago, but I was like, do you think that area that like they're at the end of the episode is what becomes Rivendell?
Yeah, because they've got the rings kind of cloaking their location in a way. Like it's almost like making a location within a location. They're in like a little pocket world, it seems like,
Right.
due to the rings. And I am no lore expert. If anyone has been listening this whole time as we've been covering this, they should know by now we are not lore experts. We're not going to talk about that because we don't know. We might know a smattering of things, but this isn't the channel for that. But if someone knows or if someone else has theories, let us know because I think that's been one of the fun things of not knowing the story as deeply as some of the other shows that I cover.
Right.
It's like I really don't know where it's going. I can make guesses and it's kind of nice not having to talk about, well, this means this and they could have done this and they should have done that. And this time it's just being along for the ride.
Yeah, I enjoy watching it and just being along for the ride and not being really even able to be like, well, they did this right or they did this wrong.
Right? It kind of takes the pressure off of everything as a viewer just to put your feet up and be like, oh, okay, so this is what happened. And you don't have to do a bunch of gymnastics to connect it to lore or, I don't know.
I don't blame you. I would consider myself an expert in watching the movies. I haven't read any of the books in this universe. I've watched like a smattering of lore videos on YouTube, but that's been like over the course of years. So I have really enjoyed watching this. I've also really enjoyed how this season, especially this final episode, really felt like one of the movies.
Yeah. Was there a specific moment that gave you like that feeling the most out of this episode?
Well, yeah, even though it seems really like minuscule to bring up, the last moments of the final scene and then the credits, that transition felt exactly like one of the movies. And then it had like the really powerful musical score to go along with it. This whole season has had really exceptional VFX for it. And I personally think they did an exceptional job on this season, especially if you consider how they did season 1.
Yeah. Agreed.
I sometimes struggle to like quantify how these two seasons came from the same production company, but whatever.
Honestly, you can pretty much go into season 2 without needing season 1. Like you could have just walked in season 2 episode 1 and been like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, I mean the only thing
it's really not necessary.
Yeah, the only things you'd really be missing are just like some character exposition from season 1, and I'm talking about from like secondary and tertiary characters.
Yeah.
Not even your main characters. As long as you have like some idea, I don't as long as you've watched the movies, you should be able to figure it out.
Do you know what scene that I felt was like the most nostalgic out of all of them that made me think of the movies was Gandalf and Tom having that little singing moment.
really loved the wrap up to this episode. Starting from Tom Bombadil and the stranger slash Gandalf, that whole like series of wrap ups, magical. I loved it.
It really ended on this kind of lighter note of hopefulness. Gandalf kind of went through these trials and tribulations of trying to figure out who he was. And to me, I kind of saw it as not so much a test for him, but he needed to choose the right thing in order to remember who he was.
Yeah.
He's not a bad guy, and him doing something that was very Gandalf like made him remember, like, ah, yes, this is who I am. This is how I respond when something like this happens. And it was just, I don't know, like it felt very movie like to me.
It was the perfect way to close out the Stranger's arc for this season. And like what you were saying, closing the season on a note of hope is very like traditional Tolkien.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
like when you think about the areas of this universe that you've engaged with, whether it be movies or books, like there's always this final note of hope, that hope is the light shining through when it's darkest. Hope, you know, it
Yeah.
endures and it gives you the strength to carry on even when things seem impossible. And that's like a big continuing theme throughout the entire storyline, whether it be here, whether it be in, you know, the books, the Hobbit movies, or the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, that's the common theme.
Yeah. I think Tolkien, the way that his works go for me, it's a lot more black and white than a lot of more current fantasy, I would say.
I would
So when you get this type of ending, it's kind of like, ah, you know, like the sun kind of setting into Tom Bombadil's little cottage and them having like a merry little sing-song moment. It's just like, ah, that's what I wanted to feel. And I think me as someone who doesn't have a lot of background knowledge, like I read the books when I was 9. It hasn't stuck with me, but I still feel the nostalgia when something like that happens. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that's sparking some type of feeling I remember from being really young reading these.
I would say that I definitely interact with Tolkien works and fantasy in a different way than I interact with some of the other fantasy that I enjoy, because a lot of fantasy that I like would probably be in the realm of dark fantasy.
Yeah, there's something so totally different about this type of story than something that's more like a political thriller type Succession, like
Right.
Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. Wheel of Time kind of sits a little bit in the middle between darker.
That's what I was thinking, actually. Because I was like, well, there's Wheel of Time. And I was like, it's not quite as dark as like A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's not as like, let's just use the word wholesome because it works, as
Mm-hmm.
this universe is.
Agreed.
But it's still much darker than most Tolkien.
Right. I think with this show, one of the highlights for me, I guess it came mostly with this episode, is what is going to happen when we go to everything that's happening in Numenor with Pharazôn sending out the dogs. Like, this is the end of episode 7. We were like, Pharazôn is cooked. How's he going to combat this? Or that was, no,
Oh, yep, you're right. That is episode 6. A Numenor. In a real sneaky switcheroo based on archaic religious law, Muriel takes Elendil's place in the trial and faces the Valor's judgment. That's how I wrote this.
Okay, I'll start
I like
over.
that I said a real sneaky switcheroo and then archaic religious law in the same fucking sentence.
There are 2 wolves inside of you. I might just leave that in. But with everything that's going on in Numenor, Pharazôn is at his last resort, right? At this point, he can't win in a what seems like a fair manner. He can't come back from this Queen of the Sea moment. So he's just like, all right, we're fascists now. Like this, we're going through the city, we're wrecking people's lives, we're rounding up anyone who might be loyal to Muriel, and we're just passing judgment. That's how we're doing it. So we get this scene of Elendil fleeing.
That's the Palantir scene.
Yes, yes. And then Pharazôn, he's got the Palantir now. He knows what's gonna happen to an extent.
But he gets the same vision as Muriel does.
But what's he gonna do? That's the question. Because
I don't know.
he can't go to his people like, I saw the things in the thing, because they'll be like, hey, we don't use that thing.
Right?
Shame on you.
They'll be like, wait, you said it's not okay, but now it's okay? Question
Right.
mark? Like,
so is the information that he has now something that's going to hurt Numenor? Like, if that information doesn't come out, do they lose a chance on how to save their city? Because Sauron's coming.
do you think this is like the beginning of Numenor's doom?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping the next season really goes into that, because it feels like this is the time of men, right? Like, we've
Yeah.
got the dwarves have their rings, the elves have their rings. Now we have the rings of men. We have to figure out like what's happening with that. I think that's one of the reasons why we've spent so much time with Isildur and his little outpost with Theo, is because now we've got the more kind of like mystical Numenorians, and then we have like the human humans who are just out there living on the farm, you know?
Right.
But it kind of feels like these two segments at some point have to converge, right? Like, I know that Numenor isn't Numenor forever. Like, we know that it goes away. I feel like that's going to come into play, but I'm also really just excited to see how things go with Elendil and Isildur, because right now they are crossing each other. They're making way back towards one another, and they're going to cross. Like, Isildur seems to be going back to Numenor. Elendil is leaving Numenor. Are they not going to see each other again? Like, are they gonna end up just not running into each other, and that being like, I have so many questions. And then if Isildur shows up, what's gonna happen with his sister? Because she thinks he's dead.
Oh, yeah. And her entire plight is based on her thinking he's dead. All of
Right.
her motives, all of her actions throughout pretty much this entire season have revolved around the idea that her brother is gone and she's furious about it.
So I could see next season being some type of character arc for her, in terms of coming to terms that she backed the wrong guy and now she has to make things right. And I'm hoping that's where it goes for her, but I could also, see her going a darker path. I don't know.
I don't know, because she does warn her father to get him out.
That's true. That's true.
There's that whole scene where Kemen and Isildur run into each other at the Númenorian
Oh my
outpost
God.
Palagir, which you can tell Kemen is stressed about seeing Isildur.
Yeah.
I can imagine he is stressed. First of all, Arian's like father's favorite. Kemen's father, Pharazôn, prefers Arian to him, which he makes pretty clear, but I don't blame him. I would too. And then now we have Isildur, like you said, going back to Numenor. So what happens with his sister? What happens out in Palagir? Because now the Númenorians are like, well, we're going to post up here, but Palagir has...
They got to cut the trees.
Yeah, they have a
too.
treaty with the Ents to not mess with the trees. And Kemen's immediately like, let's round up all the timber here, guys. Yeah. So even though there's a lot of payoff in this episode, it still leaves some of these storylines really open for next season. And the Numenor line is one that is really open for next season.
I would agree. And this outpost, I'm really curious what becomes of it, because as a whole right now, it just kind of seems like an extension of Numenor now that Kemen has shown up.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering if at some point it becomes its own story that's not a connection to Isildur, to Numenor, to Kemen, to Pharazôn. There's also the question of Theo. Like, what role does he play here? Is he going to be one of the bad guys? Is he going to be one of the good guys? We had that moment in the end where he's kind of, he's buddied up to Isildur and they have a lot in common. Their mother is dying, etc. what's the path that he's going to take? I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm really curious about a lot of this. Personally, I think if Kemen stays in Palagir, he's going to create an uprising just
Wouldn't that
because
be hilarious if he was
it would be
like,
well
I want my
deserved.
own city now. I want my own. I want to rule on my own
Yeah,
because daddy doesn't love
but
me.
all I see him doing is pissing off his constituents and creating some sort of riot.
Honestly, that would be hilarious. Like, we know that Kemen's mother saw some vision of something really, really bad happening to Kemen. Personally, I think I would like it more if it's just kind of like a human ending. Like, he tried to fly too close to the sun, gets shanked in like a muddy pond somewhere in this outpost, rather than something almost
He doesn't deserve a hero's death.
not a hero's death, but like a villain's death. Like,
Yeah, but
I don't.
I just mean in general, he doesn't deserve like a big monumental death scene. Like you were saying, I hope he just like passes away and nobody cares. This should not be an event for the annals.
Yeah, like he falls into one of those mud bogs and the
Yeah,
quicksand
and
that.
gets slurped up by that scorpion snake thing.
Yeah, I mean that would be perfect for
It would be
Kevin,
a perfect
frankly.
ending.
We also have Astrid and Isildur moment, which it's like her. I don't. I'm really confused because she was looking like she was ready to go to Numenor with him, but she's got her betrothed with her, and that's just a mess. So I don't know what's happening with that. The dwarves, on the other
Oh, get
hand,
out of here. A Balrog of Morgoth? I was so excited. Only because I've been yammering about this Balrog showing up ever since I got the first inkling that it could happen. Love it.
I think this scene just, I mean, it hits the high fantasy
Oh, yeah.
mark for me.
Plus, as an
King
opener,
Durin just what?
plus, as an opener, like
Yeah, yeah.
that, I think that was my favorite part about that scene actually, was that they used it as an opener and not a closer.
True. It really sets off a good tone for the whole episode because it's like, okay, we're going in.
Yeah.
I mean, and then King Durin goes in by essentially stage diving into the Balrog,
Yeah.
which was just
He
epic.
literally goes
Like,
in.
yeah. Durin's armor looked cool. Like,
Yeah, but like King Durin truly had a hero's ending.
yeah, yeah. That's not what we want for Kemen.
Nope, not for Kemen.
Nope. I think with the dwarves, what I do appreciate is that storyline kind of looks like last episode, like, uh-oh, what's going to happen between the dwarves and the elves because King Durin didn't show up. And by kind of extending that into this episode, we have this really crucial moment where the elves are having their last stand and it looks like there's 10 of them left, honestly. And then the dwarves show up and I was really hoping it would be King Durin, but it's not because, or I was hoping it was Prince Doran, but he's not there because the king is dead. And so you've got kind of this moment where it's like, okay, so now this relationship between the dwarves and the elves can be restored in a way.
Yeah. I mean, like, so we know that the relationships between the elves and the dwarves are going to remain stable into season 3.
I'm glad.
So am I. And I mean, like, of course, I'm interested in what's going to happen with the elves and the dwarves and the villains and things like that. But they're all so, like, integrally tied into the foundation of the storyline that I don't know if I'm quite as curious about those storylines as some of the smaller ones, like we were talking about, like with Numenor.
Yeah. I think the storyline that I'm most interested in for the dwarves is at what point do the dwarves go full greed and kind of just seal their fates? Because Prince Durin, now King Durin, has the ring now. We know his brother is vying for power. We're having a succession issue on our hands. And on top of that, Khazad-dûm has just been through like all of these like earthquake, Balrog, the mirrors have been like displaced. Like they have so much going on. I'm curious to see if they can actually join this effort and help in this fight against Sauron, against evil, or if they just are kind of too drawn to the rings at this point. Like I really don't want to know what happens if it's bad. Like
Well,
I'm
and
scared for them.
right now, Prince became King Durin, and he still has all of the Dwarven rings. But
Didn't they give them out
no, they
already?
haven't given them out yet.
Oh my god.
Yes.
Oh my god.
But all the other dwarf lords have paid tons of money in, and they want what they were owed, which is their rings. They've paid like all this tribute or taxation or however you want to look at it, but they want their what they've paid for. They want their rings. So Durin's gonna have to still contend with all the other dwarf lords next season.
Oh man. It's just not looking good for them.
The
I
dwarves are
don't
in a
know.
pickle here.
Yeah, for real. I don't know how they're going to wrap up that plot line in a really interesting way. I'm curious, but I can say just from what I'm thinking about now, it might not be my favorite considering it's just going to be messy. It's going to be bad. It's going to suck for good guys.
Well, I mean, to some extent, we do know what happens with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
I mean, like we know from other productions where this goes for them, but so during the show, we're kind of along for the journey of filling in all of those like plot holes in what happened.
Right. I really hope that at some point we get all of our big players in the same place because now we've got kind of a wrap up with the stranger and acolyte man, but we have a lot of questions too because isn't acolyte man pretty much like I'm going to challenge Sauron?
Yeah. So what Acolyte Man is vying for is not just to defeat Sauron, he wants to usurp Sauron.
That's wild. That is bold. Like the confidence of this
Yeah.
guy.
I was just thinking like the confidence here is wild. This is a crazy delusional level of confidence. I don't know why Acolyte Man believes that he's powerful enough to take on Sauron,
But
but
okay.
okay. Can't wait to see like how does
How
one
yeah, like I hope it's like
This is
a
that
breakdancing battle or something.
this is a moment for the greatest Lord of the Rings meme of all time, which is one does not simply walk into Mordor.
Yeah, like what is Acolyte Man thinking? So we know from this episode and previous episodes, Gandalf, it seems like, has to fight Acolyte Man. He's kind of like that middle villain before we get to Sauron. So we know that Gandalf's destiny, future, whatever, is tied to Sauron in some way. And now
Right.
he's got this guy standing in his way. So that's going to be a nice challenge for him to level up.
Yeah, he's the mini boss before the final boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that being Acolyte Man is the mini boss. Like, I don't think that he's going to usurp Sauron. I think he's going to probably regret that.
I mean, I'm happy to watch him try.
I am too.
But
And I've really enjoyed the addition of more Istari that we weren't already familiar with from other productions.
yeah.
Because I am curious, like, if Acolyte Man came to Middle Earth as an Astari, what happened along the way where he was like, you know what? This is for the birds. I'm trying to be the overlord.
I mean, yeah. I don't understand anything about him, Boba Fett men, the Mothmen. Like it's
Okay,
very
here's a
unclear
question.
to me.
What happened that Acolyte Man and the Boba Fett men are now beefing?
Right.
I'm that was like one thing where I was like, I'm not sure what happened here.
I almost feel like that was just a plan, like a
Okay.
fake out, like they were just playing along. But I don't know. I really don't know. I can't say. Very confusing. Maybe next season it'll become clear because that's the one plot for me where I'm just kind of like, I have no idea. I guess I'll wait and see.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the plot lines are kind of staggered, so that way they're constantly building.
Agreed.
So like we have staggered speeds at which our plot lines are progressing, but it does make sense to me that to keep like the Gandalf Acolyte Man story kind of decked for next season.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm hoping that we get more from Tom next season as well because I think Tom and Gandalf together make it's a much more interesting and fun pairing. I would love to see Gandalf kind of coming into understanding his power and what he can and can't do, and getting a little bit more of an in depth look at how the quote unquote magic of this world is kind of portrayed. Because what, in the movies, it's just kind of like it's not infinite, but it's not really a magic system like other series where there's like legit rules to things. So I'm kind of interested if they're going to approach this in a way where it's like Gandalf relearning his powers, what he can and can't do. Will they have to touch on the rules of this type of magic? I don't know. So I'm curious about that.
Actually, that's a really good point. It'll be interesting to see like Gandalf's, I guess we should call it origin story at some
Yeah.
level.
But mostly when I think about this season as a whole, I think they did a really good job. It's such an upgrade from season one. I had a really good time watching it. I, again, like the villains are just chef's kiss. I can't believe they came out with so many people that are antagonistic forces on every level of every location where we end up in this show. And I think it was just well done.
Absolutely. It was an astronomical and unexpected upgrade from season 1 to 2.
I agree. But I think we will wrap things up here. Like and subscribe if you've been with us since the beginning. I know I keep seeing the same people in comment sections, and that always makes me so happy. And I'm seeing new people as well. Laura and I will be covering other TV shows as they come out. I think we're going to do Dunk and Egg. We're going to do The Hedge Knight. We're going to do probably Dune.
Dune, is it Prophecy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for more of our podcast audio only episodes and discussions. But thank you so much for hanging out with us during this whole season, and we will see you back next time.